Francine walked into her bedroom to find divorce papers sitting in a gift box where her husband used to leave anniversary surprises. 15 years of marriage destroyed because she couldn't resist a few steamy Facebook messages with a man named Leonard. But instead of feeling guilty, Francine's first reaction was indignation. How dare her husband Rye be so dramatic about what she kept calling one stupid mistake. One stupid mistake. 6 months of secret hotel meetings, elaborate lies to cover weekend trips, and fake Facebook accounts to hide her tracks. But sure, Francine, one mistake. The really twisted part. She was actually annoyed that Rye had discovered her affair before she could figure out how to end it gracefully. Leonard had been getting clingy lately, talking about meeting in person, and Francine was starting to find the whole thing exhausting. She'd been planning to ghost him and go back to her comfortable suburban life like nothing happened. But now her comfortable life was gone. Rye had moved out, taking their 2 kids with him. Libby 19 and Craig 17. Both old enough to understand exactly what mom had done and choose dad's side. The house felt like a museum of her former happiness, every empty space screaming about what she'd lost. And the worst part, Francine genuinely believed she was the victim here. In her twisted mind, her family was overreacting, abandoning her when she needed support most. After all, she reasoned she'd never actually left Rye for Leonard. It was just exploration. But here's what Francine didn't know yet. While she was busy playing victim, Rye had been playing detective. And when you're stupid enough to conduct your affair on social media, you leave a very clear paper trail. The woman who thought she was so clever was about to learn that fake Facebook accounts leave real evidence. Let's rewind to see how Francine managed to destroy what everyone called the perfect marriage. For 15 years, she'd been living the suburban dream with Rye. Nice house, 2 great kids, financial stability. Rye worked his ass off as the primary breadwinner, while Francine enjoyed her part-time job at a boutique, basically playing dress-up for a living. But apparently having a devoted husband who paid all the bills while she bought designer handbags wasn't enough excitement for our dear Francine. She was bored. Can you imagine, bored with a man who'd never cheated, never lied, never given her a single red flag in 15 years of marriage? So when Leonard slid into her Facebook DMs last spring, Francine didn't block him like a married woman should have. Instead, she engaged. Because why solve marital boredom with communication or therapy when you can blow up your entire family for a stranger online? Leonard was everything Rye supposedly wasn't. Mysterious, spontaneous, full of exciting stories about his travels and business ventures. He sent long romantic messages about how beautiful Francine was, how she deserved to be worshipped, how her husband probably didn't appreciate her properly. Classic manipulation tactics that Francine ate up like candy. The red flags were everywhere, of course. Leonard's photos looked too professional, like stock images. His stories about jet-setting around Europe seemed rehearsed. He always had excuses for why they couldn't video chat or talk on the phone. But Francine was so drunk on the attention and fantasy that she ignored every single warning sign. Within 2 months, they'd moved from Facebook Messenger to creating fake accounts so they could communicate more privately. Leonard suggested it naturally, claiming he needed to protect his business reputation. Francine, brilliant as she was, thought this was romantic secrecy rather than the obvious scam setup it actually was. Soon she was living a complete double life. Fake Facebook profiles to chat with Leonard. Elaborate lies about girls' weekends and work trips to cover hotel meetings that never actually happened because Leonard always had last-minute cancellations. But somehow this made him even more irresistible to Francine. The harder he was to pin down, the more obsessed she became. For 6 months, she crafted this elaborate fantasy romance, while her real family went about their daily lives completely unaware that wife and mother was mentally checked out of their relationship. She was living a double life and loving every minute of the deception. The whole fantasy came crashing down on a Tuesday evening in November. Rye had been doing the dishes while Francine scrolled through her phone at the kitchen table, probably chatting with Leonard on one of her fake accounts. She'd gotten sloppy after 6 months of deception, careless in the way cheaters always do when they think they're smarter than everyone else. When Francine went to take a shower, she left her phone on the counter, unlocked, with her Facebook messages still open. And Rye, being the trusting husband he'd always been, wouldn't normally look. But a notification popped up from an account he'd never seen before. Some generic male profile sending heart emojis to his wife. So he looked. And what he found was 6 months of messages between his wife and a stranger named Leonard. Romantic messages, sexual messages, plans for meetups that Francine had disguised as work trips, an entire emotional affair laid out in devastating detail. When Francine came out of the bathroom 20 minutes later, she found Rye sitting at the kitchen table with her phone in his hands. His face was completely calm, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he'd been screaming. "Who the hell is Leonard?" Rye asked quietly. And here's where Francine really showed her character. Instead of breaking down, confessing, begging forgiveness, her first instinct was damage control. "It's not what it looks like," she said, the classic cheater's opening line. "It was just talking, nothing physical ever happened." But Rye had read the messages. He'd seen 6 months of evidence that his wife had emotionally checked out of their marriage for a stranger. One stupid mistake, Francine insisted, already minimizing what she'd done. "That's all it was, one stupid mistake, and you're acting like I burned the house down." Rye looked at her for a long moment, this woman he'd loved for 15 years, and saw someone he didn't recognize. "One stupid mistake," he repeated. "For 6 months." He stood up, walked to their bedroom, and started packing a bag. Francine followed, talking frantically about how they could work through this, how it meant nothing, how Leonard was just a fantasy. But Rye wasn't listening anymore. By midnight, he was gone, and when the kids woke up the next morning and realized Dad had left, they packed their bags too. The kids didn't even look back when they walked out the door. For 48 hours after Rye and the kids left, Francine lived in complete denial. She kept calling and texting, leaving voicemails about how they needed to talk this through like adults. But every call went straight to voicemail. Every text showed as delivered, but never read. It took her 2 full days to realize the horrible truth: they had all blocked her. Her husband of 15 years, her 19-year-old daughter, her 17-year-old son. Even her own kids had blocked their mother's phone number. But did this make Francine reflect on her choices? Of course not. Instead, she decided that Rye was being controlling and manipulative by turning the kids against her. Because clearly the problem wasn't that she'd destroyed their family, it was that everyone was overreacting to her harmless little flirtation. So she called her sister Michelle, expecting sympathy and support. "Rye found some messages on my phone," she explained, carefully editing the story. "We had a little fight, and now he's being so dramatic. He took the kids and moved out over nothing." Over nothing. 6 months of emotional cheating reduced to nothing. "He's acting like I had a full-blown affair," Francine continued, her voice dripping with wounded innocence. "All because I was talking to someone online. It's not like I slept with the guy. He's being so dramatic about one little mistake." But Michelle wasn't buying it. "Francine, what kind of messages are we talking about here? Because Rye's not the dramatic type. If he moved out, it had to be pretty bad." Even her own sister was taking Rye's side. This wasn't going according to Francine's script at all. The reality check got worse when she tried calling her closest friends. Sarah, her workout buddy, went quiet when Francine explained the situation. "I mean, if you were having emotional conversations with another man for months, I can see why Rye would be upset," Sarah said carefully. Her book club friend Lisa was even more direct. "Francine, honey, that's called cheating. Emotional cheating is still cheating." But Francine wasn't hearing any of this. In her mind, everyone was just jealous of her marriage or brainwashed by Rye's manipulation. She couldn't accept that maybe, just maybe, she was the problem. The wake-up call came 3 days later when a process server showed up at her workplace. Right there in the boutique in front of her coworkers and customers, she was handed divorce papers. Real ones this time, not tucked inside a gift box. The humiliation was complete. Her manager had to cover for her while she sat in the break room, staring at legal documents that made everything official. Rye wasn't just angry, he was done. Completely, legally done. But even then, even with divorce papers in her hands and her coworkers whispering behind the register, Francine's first thought wasn't remorse. Her coworkers saw everything, and now they all knew her business. The divorce papers were just the beginning. What really broke Francine's delusional bubble was when she realized her own children had chosen their father over her. Not because Rye had turned them against her, but because Libby and Craig were old enough to understand exactly what their mother had done. Libby, her 19-year-old daughter, who used to call her best friend, sent exactly one text message: "I can't believe you threw our family away for some random guy online. Don't contact me until you figure out how to take responsibility for what you did." Craig, her baby boy, was even more direct. "You're not the mom we thought you were. Dad never cheated on you, never lied to you, never made us question if our family was real. But you did all of that." These weren't children being manipulated by an angry father. These were young adults making their own moral judgments about their mother's character, and their verdict was devastating. But just when Francine thought things couldn't get worse, life threw her another curveball. 2 weeks after the divorce papers were served, she missed her period. The pregnancy test came back positive. 8 weeks pregnant, which meant conception happened right around the time she was deepest in her affair with Leonard. Now Francine knew the timeline. She knew she'd been intimate with both Rye and Leonard during that window. Well intimate with Rye and sexting with Leonard since they'd never actually met in person. But still, the doubt was there. Whose baby was she carrying? And speaking of Leonard, where was her great love during this crisis? The man who'd promised to whisk her away from her boring suburban life had suddenly gone radio silent. His Facebook profiles, all of them fake, remember, had been deleted. His phone numbers were disconnected. Leonard had vanished like he never existed, leaving Francine pregnant and alone. But our delusional heroine wasn't ready to give up yet. If she couldn't reach Leonard, she'd have to win back her family. So she launched what can only be described as a harassment campaign disguised as reconciliation. She showed up at Rye's new apartment crying about the pregnancy and begging him to consider their unborn child. She ambushed Libby at her college campus, sobbing about how she needed her daughter during this difficult time. She cornered Craig outside his high school playing the victim card about how cruel everyone was being to a pregnant woman. Each attempt backfired spectacularly. Rye told her to communicate only through lawyers. Libby called campus security, and Craig's school administration had to escort Francine off the property when she caused a scene in the parking lot. But the most pathetic moment came when she showed up at Rye's office, 8 months pregnant and desperate, demanding that he speak to her about their family situation. Security had to physically remove her from the building while she screamed about how everyone was abandoning a pregnant woman. Security had to escort her out of Craig's school, and it was all caught on their surveillance cameras. While Francine was busy playing, victim Rye was playing chess. He'd hired a private investigator to dig into Leonard's background because something about the whole situation smelled fishy. Call it intuition, call it experience. But Rye suspected there was more to this Leonard character than met the eye. The PI's report came back 3 weeks later, and it was a bombshell that would destroy what little remained of Francine's fantasy world. Leonard Martinez, the sophisticated businessman who'd swept Francine off her feet with tales of international travel and luxury living. He didn't exist. The photos were stolen from a Spanish model's Instagram account. The stories about European business ventures were copy-pasted from travel blogs. But here's the kicker. The person behind the Leonard profiles was real. His name was Leo Jiang, and he was a 19-year-old college student from Ohio who spent his free time catfishing lonely married women for emotional entertainment. 19 years old. Francine had blown up her marriage for a teenager who was probably laughing at her with his dorm buddies. The PI had tracked down Leo's real social media accounts, his college enrollment records, even interviewed his roommate. Leo had been running multiple fake profiles, targeting middle-aged women across social media platforms. Francine wasn't his only victim. She was just his most successful one. Leo's roommate confirmed that he'd been bragging about this desperate housewife who thinks I'm some rich businessman. The kid had screenshots of their conversations, saved as entertainment sharing Francine's romantic messages with his friends like they were comedy gold. Francine had destroyed her family for a teenager's prank. Meanwhile, the paternity question that had been eating at Francine got resolved when Rye demanded a prenatal DNA test. The results were conclusive, the baby was his, which somehow made the whole situation even more tragic. She'd risked everything for a fake romance while carrying her husband's child. But Rye's legal team wasn't done gathering evidence. They'd been documenting every one of Francine's harassment attempts, every violation of the restraining order. They'd quietly filed every public meltdown she'd had while trying to win her family back. The security footage from Craig's school showed Francine screaming in the parking lot about how everyone was abandoning a pregnant woman. The video from Libby's college captured her following her daughter across campus, crying and begging for forgiveness. Rye's office building had crystal clear footage of security guards physically removing her from the premises. But the most damning evidence was the compilation of her social media posts. While publicly playing the abandoned pregnant wife, Francine had been posting passive-aggressive updates about toxic family members and people who give up on marriage over small mistakes. Small mistakes. Even pregnant and alone, she was still calling 6 months of emotional cheating a small mistake. Rye's lawyer had been systematically building a case that painted Francine not as a remorseful wife who'd made an error in judgment, but as a manipulative woman who refused to take responsibility for destroying her family. Every tantrum, every violation of boundaries, every attempt to weaponize her pregnancy, it was all documented, time-stamped, and ready for court. The final piece of evidence was the most devastating recordings of Francine's voicemails to her family. Hours of messages where she alternated between self-pity and blame, tears and threats, promises to change and demands for immediate forgiveness. In one particularly unhinged message, she'd actually said, "If you don't take me back, I'll make sure this baby never knows his father. You'll regret abandoning us." Every tantrum had been caught on camera, every manipulation attempt preserved for legal review. Even with all the evidence stacked against her, Francine wasn't ready to surrender. If anything, being exposed as a catfish victim only made her more desperate to control the narrative. She launched a social media campaign that would have been impressive if it wasn't so pathetic. Her Facebook posts painted her as a pregnant woman abandoned by her cruel family during her darkest hour. "Some people give up on 15 years of marriage over one mistake," she wrote, accompanied by a photo of her growing belly. "I guess loyalty doesn't mean what it used to." She conveniently left out the part about the fake Facebook accounts, the 6 months of deception, or the fact that her mistake was falling for a teenager's catfishing scheme. Instead, she positioned herself as a victim of Rye's unforgiving nature and her children's heartless abandonment. The manipulation campaign extended beyond social media. She started showing up at family gatherings she wasn't invited to, using her pregnancy as a shield against criticism. "You're really going to turn away a pregnant woman?" she'd ask when relatives tried to ask her to leave. But her most calculated move was weaponizing the baby itself. In a series of increasingly unhinged voicemails to Rye, she alternated between threats and emotional blackmail. "This baby deserves to know his father," she sobbed in one message. "How can you punish an innocent child for my mistakes?" Then in the very next voicemail, "If you don't start acting like a family, I'll make sure you never see this baby. I'll move across the country. You'll regret abandoning us." The pregnancy had become her last desperate card to play, and she was playing it with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Meanwhile, Libby and Craig had reached their breaking point. Both kids, now young adults, decided to write formal statements for the divorce proceedings. These weren't emotional rants, they were thoughtful, devastating assessments of their mother's character. Libby's statement was particularly brutal. "Our mother destroyed our family for a fantasy relationship with a fake person online. Even after learning the truth, she continues to blame everyone but herself. We don't want a relationship with someone who can lie so easily and refuse to take responsibility for her actions." Craig's was shorter, but equally damning. "She chose a stranger over her family. That tells us everything we need to know about her priorities." These weren't children being manipulated by an angry father. These were young adults who'd witnessed their mother's behavior firsthand and made their own moral judgments. The final divorce mediation was scheduled for early March. All evidence would be presented, all statements read, and Francine's fate would be decided. Rye's legal team was confident. They had documentation of everything from the catfishing revelation to the harassment campaign to the kids' own testimonies. But they also knew that Francine wouldn't go quietly. A woman who'd spent months refusing to accept responsibility for her actions wasn't going to suddenly develop self-awareness in a lawyer's office. Everything would be decided in one final meeting, and this time there would be cameras rolling. The final divorce mediation took place in a sterile conference room at Rye's lawyer's office. Francine arrived 20 minutes late, visibly pregnant and wearing her best wounded victim expression. She'd clearly spent time on her appearance. Hair done, makeup, perfect maternity dress that screamed, "abandoned pregnant wife." What she didn't expect was the video camera set up in the corner recording everything for legal documentation. "This session is being recorded for court records," the mediator announced. "All parties have been notified and consent to this recording." Francine's confident smile flickered. Suddenly, performing for an audience felt a lot more dangerous when that audience included a judge who'd review every word she said. The evidence presentation began methodically. Rye's lawyer laid out the timeline of deception: 6 months of fake Facebook accounts, elaborate lies about work trips, emotional cheating, disguised as innocent friendship. Each piece of evidence was projected on the conference room screen like a PowerPoint of marital destruction. Francine tried to interrupt to explain to minimize, but the documentation was overwhelming. Screenshots of romantic messages, timestamps showing when lies were told, hotel receipts for meetings that never happened because Leonard kept canceling at the last minute. Mrs. Peterson, the mediator said, these appear to be systematic deceptions over an extended period. How do you respond to this evidence? It was just talking, Francine insisted, falling back on her favorite defense. Nothing physical ever happened. It was one stupid mistake that got blown out of proportion. But then came the bombshell that shattered even Francine's delusional confidence. Your Honor, Rye's lawyer said, we've also investigated the identity of Mrs. Peterson's affair partner, Leonard Martinez. The screen filled with side-by-side photos, the handsome businessman from the fake profiles next to a college ID photo of a baby-faced 19-year-old named Leo Zhang. Leonard Martinez does not exist. Mrs. Peterson conducted her 6-month affair with Leo Zhang, a 19-year-old college student in Ohio who creates fake profiles to catfish married women for entertainment. The silence in the room was deafening. Francine's face went through a series of expressions: shock, denial, and finally humiliated rage. We have statements from Mr. Zhang's roommate confirming that he bragged about manipulating Mrs. Peterson, sharing her romantic messages as entertainment with his dorm mates. Francine had destroyed her family for a teenager's prank, and now it was part of the official court record. But the real devastation came when the mediator read Libby and Craig's impact statements aloud. In the sterile conference room with cameras rolling, the words of her own children condemned her more effectively than any lawyer ever could. Our mother chose a fake relationship over her real family, Libby's statement began. Even after learning she was catfished, she refuses to take responsibility. She's more concerned with being seen as a victim than with the damage she caused. Craig's statement was shorter but equally brutal. She taught us that actions have consequences, but apparently those rules don't apply to her. We can't trust someone who lies so easily and blames everyone else for her choices. These weren't children being manipulated by an angry father. These were young adults making moral judgments about their mother's character, and their verdict was devastating. The final blow came with the video evidence of Francine's harassment campaign. Security footage from Craig's school showed her screaming in the parking lot. College surveillance captured her following Libby across campus. Office building cameras recorded her being physically removed by security guards. But the most damning footage was from her own social media posts, compiled into a timeline that showed her refusing to accept responsibility even while demanding forgiveness. Your Honor, the mediator said, based on the evidence presented, the pattern of deception, harassment, and refusal to accept responsibility, I'm recommending the following terms. The judgment was swift and absolute. Divorce granted. Supervised visitation with the unborn child. Restraining orders preventing contact with Libby and Craig. Financial support limited to childcare only. Francine sat in stunned silence as 15 years of marriage were dissolved in a matter of minutes. The marriage is hereby dissolved, the mediator announced. This concludes today's proceedings. As everyone filed out of the conference room, Francine remained seated, staring at the table where the evidence of her destruction had been laid bare for the cameras. She'd walked in expecting sympathy for a pregnant woman abandoned by her family. Instead, she'd been exposed as a manipulative cheater who'd fallen for a teenager's scam and refused to own her mistakes. The red recording light finally went dark, but the damage was permanent and official. Francine walked out of that conference room in complete shock. 15 years of marriage gone, her children lost, her reputation destroyed on video for a court record that would follow her forever. But even in that moment of total defeat, her first thought wasn't about what she'd done wrong. It was about how unfair everyone was being to her, how dramatic Rye was for not forgiving one stupid mistake, how cruel her kids were for abandoning their pregnant mother, how the system was rigged against women like her. She drove home to an empty house, her belly growing, with a child whose father wanted nothing to do with her and still couldn't grasp the simple truth that she'd brought this all on herself. 6 months later, baby Ryan was born, named after his father who attended the birth under court-supervised visitation, but barely looked at Francine. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that she'd named her son after the man she'd betrayed. But motherhood didn't change Francine's fundamental character. She used baby Ryan as a prop for sympathy, posting endless photos with captions about single motherhood and family abandonment. She was still the victim in her own story, still waiting for everyone else to apologize to her. Friends who checked her social media reported the same pattern: victim posts about being abandoned, passive-aggressive comments about people who give up on family, and increasingly desperate attempts to paint herself as the wronged party. The most telling detail: she'd started dating again, creating new profiles on dating apps where she described herself as a single mom whose family fell apart due to misunderstandings. Misunderstandings. Even now, she couldn't call it what it was. Some people never learn from their mistakes, even the really stupid ones. Francine destroyed her family for a teenager's prank, lost everything that mattered, and still believes she's the victim. The woman who threw away 15 years of marriage for fake Facebook messages is still out there, probably crafting her next one stupid mistake. And somewhere in Ohio, a college kid named Leo is probably laughing at how long this story lasted.